you have an extensive background in what I call DNA Valley through a whole bunch of very high-profile companies, and you've started another company recently. And why don't we just start there? NextCure. It's an immuno-oncology company, if I read the website correctly and learned a little bit about it. But can you tell us, kind of your angle on immuno-oncology and what you're doing?
Sure. Well, thank you so much. Immuno-oncology is kind of one of the pioneering technologies that people are using to develop these next generation, what we call immunomedicines. And our goal really, from the start was to develop novel, first-in-class proprietary therapeutics that would really disrupt the standard of care for cancer patients. And, that first and foremost, that's our passion. So 6 years ago, we spun a company out of Yale University. Although we're in Beltsville, Maryland, a lot of people still think we're in New Haven. So we tell them we're in Beltsville, Maryland, the southern tip of New Haven, Connecticut. But from
Yale South.
Exactly, yeah. Yale South. But from the beginning was really to develop a company that was fully integrated. So we do everything from discovery through translational research. We have our own development and GMP manufacturing in-house. And now we also do our own regulatory and clinical development. So over that 6-year period, we've built a company of about 90 people. We're focused on our clinical development pipeline. We have 3 candidates now in clinical development in a number of different tumor types. And our goal is to really develop products that focus on those non-responders. So the 60 to 70% of patients that don't routinely respond to like an anti-PD-1 therapy. In addition, we're interested in developing therapies for those progressors. We still haven't cured cancer, and we still have a long way to go. So a lot of the drugs that we're focused on is to develop therapeutic opportunities and modalities for the non-responders, the progressors, and then also, a number of tumor types that we haven't even addressed.
What's the underlying technology that you're using? Like, what are the normal mechanisms of action that you utilize in order to go after cancer in the body or to improve outcomes?
Great question. So we have a platform that we can basically screen through the entire human genome on a gene-by-gene basis and ask a very simple question. Does a protein stimulate or inhibit the immune system if it has any immunological activity at all? So our goal now is really being driven by the science, trying to alleviate immunosuppression, trying to activate T cells, basically trying to normalize immune function. So what we do at NextCure is study a number of these checkpoint inhibitors or immunomodulators, or what we call immunomedicines, that can either activate the immune system and really change it to normalize normal immune function.
So it sounds sort of like checkpoint inhibitors on steroids, right? So what you've done is if I'm understanding you correctly, so you have a platform where you can evaluate like a huge number of molecules and to see what the impact is on the immune system, and that you can, at that point in a targeted way, you would have more methods to reduce the immunosuppression and increase the normal immune response to cancer, right? So it'd sort of be like Keytruda, but instead of just one molecule, what you're saying is, we can find tons of molecules that will have an impact on this, and then you can pick out the ones that have the greatest impact and design new drugs?
Exactly.
Am I reading that right?
I mean, Keytruda and Nivo, great starts.
Yeah.
But anti-PD-1 therapies only impact 30 to 40% of patients.
Yeah.
So that leaves 60 to 70% of patients still in need. Not to mention many of those individuals, even after treatment, progress.
Yeah.
So we need new therapies. And that's really the driving passion and force at NextCure, is we've built a team of world-renowned immunologists. We collaborate with people here in DNA Valley. We collaborate with people all over the world. And we take the best of the best in integrating state-of-the-art technology, novel targets, various evaluation systems. And now that we have in this inventory of targets, we're now adapting our product development strategy. And what we're doing is we're taking a kind of a triangulation approach. So that triangle really in one angle focuses on the patient. We're developing tests where we can screen for patients that express the target that we think will be most responsive to therapy.
Right.
The second angle is biomarkers. We're developing the tools, the assays, all of this work is done in-house, so we can actually take tissue or blood samples from patients and to determine if our drugs are doing what we think they should be doing mechanistically, and how does that correlate to clinical responses. And then the third angle of that triangle is combinations. No one drug is going to do everything, and you see this great movement in immuno-oncology or in cancer in general, where people are taking different technologies, different targets, and developing these combination therapies and regimens to really disrupt the standard of care.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that cancer is really a team sport, right? All the way from the doctor to a whole bunch of different tools that the doctor can deploy against the cancer. And it sounds like you're working on a whole set of additional tools that, especially alongside your these molecular tests or these markers that you're able to look at, you would be able to give some information to that frontline physician to help point them at the right combination of a variety of things. It could even be something from a competitor, but it could be some things from your portfolio, some things from other sources as well. Is that sort of how you're looking at it?
That's exactly right. I mean, medicine is moving towards personalized medicine, where we can screen patients, identify their cancer, identify the antigens causing that cancer, study the immune response or the immune condition at any given stage of disease, and then really tailor the treatment with respect to any one or more possible technologies and tools to treat that individual.
And you're really on both sides of the equation too, because you're doing the personalized medicine tests and personalized medicine. It can be combined. Yeah, which is really good because, it gives you control over your own destiny as well. I mean, that also explains why, 90 people is a substantial company. That's a lot of mouths to feed, a big investment, and, just tremendous momentum in this space. So congratulations. Now, to what extent, so you spun out of Yale North and you created this Yale South. So was this like technology that you out-licensed from them, or and was there any funding or support that came along with it, or were you on your own to then go ahead and collect together the funding to make this thing go?
Yeah, starting companies is always a long story because it involves state-of-the-art technology, impressive founders that have contributed to modern day science and medicine, and then obviously, the syndicate of venture capitalists that one brings into the mix to get that seed capital and to start the company. So, our founder is Li-Ping Chen. We actually got to know Li-Ping in our last company that we started here in DNA Valley when he was at Hopkins. And when I first met Li-Ping, his focus was really studying the immune system, but really how to modulate it in a way where we could develop these next generation therapies. I must admit, I learned a lot of immunology through him, and I still do. Subsequently, our last company we sold, but Li-Ping had moved to Yale. We've maintained that relationship. So a lot of the original technology, to answer your question, came from his lab. Our initial target, which is our lead program, NC318 targeting Siglec-15, came out of his lab. We have a traditional license from the university, and all the usual business terms that are associated with that. They've been very supportive, of the company. But this is how many companies get started. It evolves around a relationship with a thought leader or a famous scientist at a university. It goes through the next step of working with a tech transfer or licensing office. Next thing you know, you've got an agreement in place, licensing the technology, and then the tough work begins. You have to start shopping and looking for investors. We were very fortunate to align ourselves with two large pharmaceutical companies that kind of knew of our work, knew of Li-Ping's work, based on him being a luminary in the field of modern day immuno-oncology. So that foundation alone, having an established management team with a lot of experience, having a luminary and founder like Li-Ping Chen coming out of a major institution, gets the attention of investors.
Yeah.
Then the hard work goes putting that story together on what the next steps are in building the company.
Yeah. No, that does sound like you really had all the elements together, right? You know, I came out of the computer industry into this industry, and obviously I didn't have a track record that venture capitalists could look at, and also it wasn't at a time in the gene and cell therapy space where there was a lot of interest amongst institutional investors and pharma companies anyway. So it all worked out. So, you know, we survived and we were getting things going. But when I hear your story, I hear you checking all the boxes, right? You know, recognized technology from a brand name university. Okay, check. Somebody with tremendous amount of business experience yourself, you know, and a history of delivering on science and on business, right? Check. So this is an eminently fundable enterprise, right? So I get it, like you're right in the mainstream. And it also sounds like there was some additional, serendipity in that there were a couple of pharma companies that were already interested in where this technology could go. So you had partners as well. Well, check again, right? So what VCs are in this deal?
Yeah, so the original VCs that came in were the venture capital arms of Pfizer and Lilly through their Lilly Asia venture arm. We had Canaan Partners, a group that's very comfortable in investing in Yale spin-out companies, Sofinova, as well as OrbiMed. So we had a very strong syndicate of people that really understood the industry. And to your point earlier in checking off those boxes, for the people listening to this, it took 30 plus years to figure out which boxes had to be checked off. So a lot of experience and learning along the way.
Well, you haven't been doing 30 years of this particular company, have you?
No,
okay.
This is
but yeah, that's right. I mean, we're all standing on the shoulders of giants, really,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
You know, and there's this incredible momentum and progress in the science, and even this area is really growing. That's why I started to think of this place as DNA Valley, because of my experience in Silicon Valley. That you can see there's a critical mass of a lot of really great things going on in this area that I want to definitely loop back to after we learn a little bit more about your experience, because you really are that serial entrepreneur, startup guy that I think is fundamental to creating the kind of phenomena that you see in a place like Silicon Valley. And of course, all the conditions need to be right still, right? Right place, right time. But that is one of those critical elements, is somebody with experience growing biotech companies within this area, who's hooked into the universities, who's hooked into the whole workforce development, you know, has been part of it and has tapped it before, and has credibility that they bring with them to this area to take advantage of all the things that are naturally here. And so, you know, roll this all back for me. Like, let's start with your, you know, coming out of school, like a PhD from where?
Well, I don't actually have a PhD.
All right.
A lot of it, my learning was through the School of Hard Knocks. I was actually in high school an upholsterer apprentice, and I was building furniture. But for my hobby, I was reading genetics textbooks. I was fascinated with genetics, and this is in the 70s, where I was interested in learning about human behavior. Perhaps because of my misbehavior at the time. No, it wasn't that bad.
You were a bad kid?
No, I wasn't a bad kid. So when I started studying genetics, computers were just getting off the ground with respect to putting the phone and linking into a major, system where you could start downloading information. And at that time, there were 10 schools that had undergraduate degrees in genetics. 3 were in California. I was living in Florida at the time. So I said, okay, California, here we come. So I looked at San Diego, I looked at Berkeley, and I ended up going to UC Davis in Northern California. And the reason I chose that was you may recall the Cohen-Boyer patent. Well, Herb Boyer at a UCSF, working with Stanley Cohen at Stanford, were two of the pioneering scientists that really came up with the tools to do recombinant DNA technology, to do genetic engineering. And I was fortunate to work with a professor who actually was a postdoc under Herb Boyer. And Ray Rodriguez, who's been my friend for 40 years. He was my professor, he was my mentor, collaborator over the years. So after learning a lot about how to use the tools in manipulating genes and expressing genes and focusing on problems, and back then, coming in California, we were looking at agricultural problems as well as, looking at healthcare. But when it came to healthcare and companies started getting spun out of universities, they were looking for people that could spell DNA. So I figured, well, that's a good start. So I helped start a company, a diagnostic company actually, in Northern California, which was focused on therapeutic drug monitoring. From there, I joined a company called Chiron. Spent 12 years there in 12 different offices or laboratories. I started out as a yeast biologist. So we were expressing heterologous proteins in yeast. And I thought this was great because this is obviously the early 80s. We didn't even call it biotech. I think we called it genetic engineering research. We didn't know where the science was going. And I thought being able to manipulate yeast, if the industry went flat, I could make sourdough bread in San Francisco or beer or wine. So my parents were really happy. So from there, it was quite somewhat fortuitous that when we were doing all this research, they needed someone that could understand the science and then also interact with patent attorneys to protect the inventions that were being made. And this was during the days of HIV. We've talked about hepatitis C, a lot of different viral proteins that we were trying to produce, growth factors, and the list goes on. The problem is no one wanted to work with lawyers. So I got pulled out of the lab basically because of my understanding of science and my ability to interact with people. So I ended up building a patent department for 6 years. Filed hundreds and hundreds of applications around the world. Filed the original hepatitis C patent application, which actually was the foundation of the work that that team won the Nobel Prize a couple of years ago for their contributions in hepatitis C. Mike Houghton's work, he was the lead inventor. And then from there, understanding the science and the intellectual property on how to value technology then kind of opened up doors with respect to how to build science, how to leverage science, how to advance product development faster. We were trying to accelerate it. And we could only do so much internally. So through the early days, we started funding the companies and advancing our science through collaborations. So we started working with universities from a scientific perspective, and then most of the major pharma companies. They were investing in biotech, they were trying to build their portfolio, they were trying to get access to all of this genetic engineering work, very similar to what happens today. So after 6 years, spent 5 years in business development, worked with universities, small companies, almost every major pharmaceutical company around the world. And I was able to triangulate the science, the legal, and the business. So from there, after Chiron, the company went from 30 people, which I really enjoyed. I was really happy. When I left 12 years later, it was 6,000 people, and Novartis was just about to acquire them. So I was amazed with what had happened in the Bay Area. Biotech was taking off. Silicon Valley was taking off. I could put my typewriter aside. I could get a computer now. And I started thinking, if this could happen in Northern California, imagine what could happen in the DNA Valley, in Maryland, in the Mid-Atlantic region. I just thought, we have universities here. University of Maryland, Hopkins. We have access to other educational institutions. We have the FDA here. We have the Patent Office in Virginia. We've got access to the NCI, NIH. So I thought, okay, Maryland, here I come. So
what year was that?
That was basically 1996.
Amazing vision. I mean, nobody would deny that you were spot on. at this point, right? Because I think that all the things that you just said are so obvious within this environment. But to spot that back in '96 and decide that, okay, this is a place that's going to take off, that's prescient, good crystal ball. And by the way, the fact that you got your street PhD instead of your official one makes this an even better story, right? It does really show that the entrepreneurial nature and the flexibility and the interest in the sort of the broad application of science and not just the science itself is a critical component in entrepreneurship and in the creative formation of new companies or contributing to companies that exist already. So here you come in '96, setting a stake down here. And so what was your first stop?
Yeah, so my first stop was MedImmune, and it was a big move.
Good first stop.
It was a great stop. They had great people, great science, superior technology, and they were out to change the world, which many of us entrepreneurs continue to strive to do.
Yeah.
So I got to work with some of the founders like Wayne Hockmeyer and Jim Young, Dave Mott. All of them have been tremendous mentors to me over the years. And the reason I made that move was I saw this ecosystem just getting started. MedImmune was focused on monoclonal antibodies. Human genome sciences, which ended up being acquired by GSK, was focused on sequencing and understanding the human genome. A lot of people may not recall there's a company called GTI, which really set the foundation for gene therapy. So everything was happening within, I don't know, maybe 3 square miles.
Yeah.
And you'd bump into people and be talking science, and people really felt they were changing the world.
Yeah.
New tools, new technology, people were coming from all over, and I just thought this set of companies were really going to catalyze the ecosystem that would ultimately, build the Mid-Atlantic biotechnology to what it is today, and we're just getting started.
Yeah, I think that all of that technology, of course, is the underpinning of the industry globally, but it's interesting because there's still some advantages to being right here. Some of the things that you mentioned earlier about, being in the shadow of NIH and the FDA, and I also think that there was a big advantage to being here when the Human Genome Project was completed, and it released a tremendous number of PhDs that understood genetics, molecular biology, viral vectors, sequencing, all of those things. And so there was this critical mass that was ready to grow, but in fact it didn't happen immediately. You did see a bunch of little startups go, and of course MedImmune was still on fire. I mean, they were on that incredible trajectory that whole time, but it still took a little while for it to catch here. And yet I see, and I wonder if you see the same thing, that I see that there are more of the precipitants of a steep trajectory of growth in this area than maybe there are in most areas in the world. It's not just that we have all these basic ingredients of a great entrepreneurial area based on a technology that has such wide applicability and could create such tremendous value, like cures for cancer and cures for everything else, right? But we still have land to build on. We still have a tremendous number of STEM graduates coming out of a really good educational system, right, within Maryland that is supported with a tremendous amount of investment. And I can see a lot of reasons why this is just great soil for a company like NextCure. I mean, when did you start seeing it? So you're at MedImmune, and this whole area is just awash in people that are excited about the future, right? And probably you can't, throw a rock without hitting somebody that is interested in DNA, right? So it must have just been electric. But when did you see this thing did you find yourself during that transition period from the initial technology, sort of DNA 1.0 to a little bit of irrational exuberance, a little bit of adjustment to, DNA Valley 2.0, which is, I think, we're solidly in. Where were you at that time?
Yeah, so, after about almost 6 years at MedImmune, and it was right before, they were acquired by AstraZeneca, once you get the bug of biotech and wanting to really be at the cutting edge of science and innovation and really having an impact on modern day medicine, you say, this was fun, let's do it all over. So, my career has always been build them, grow them, and then kind of start all over. So it's kind of like being a farmer. You plant your seeds, everything comes up in the season, you harvest, and you know what? You got to plant more seeds again. So you start all over. But it's a beautiful thing. And you get to work with, all different types of people, solving different problems. So after MedImmune, Scott Koenig, the head of research, actually was starting another company locally called Macrogenics. They were focused on antibodies, FC engineering of antibodies, bispecifics. And Scott asked me if I would join him to help get the company going. So I spent 5 years in Macrogenics, helped build a great team of people, and it's been really an impressive company even to this day, and being a pioneer in a lot of the work they're doing. After about 5 years, that's usually kind of when I get a little antsy. Most entrepreneurs get antsy 4, 5, 6 years. One of the investors at Macrogenics, Arnie Yaronski, who's since passed, but was really one of the key venture capitalists to help fund a lot of startup companies. So he started telling me about what was going on at Hopkins. And he said, how's your immunology? I said, not too good. He said, well, why don't you come up and start talking to some of the, world leaders that will lay the groundwork for what was now immuno-oncology. Drew Pardoll, Li-Ping Chen, Liz Jaffe, and others. So I think what was really fascinating was really the vision on where the science was going. And I think it was maybe a little bit ahead of our time. But we started Amplimmune with pretty much a $21 million investment from really 2 venture capitalists, Interwest and the Wellcome Trust out of the UK. We then ran into 2008, 2009. The financial markets kind of tanked. So we really built the company based on strategic partnerships. We worked closely with GSK, Daiichi Sankyo, and then over a 6-year period, because our science and understanding of immunology became so strong, ultimately, we sold the company to AstraZeneca. So after that, it was like, okay, we helped with the integration. We helped advance some of the programs forward. And then from there, we then moved on, and that's how we started NextCure 6 years ago.
So did you said you'd met some of the folks where you later acquired a lot of the science, but was that sort of the main thing that you were able to carry forward from Amplimmune? Because it sounds like you got all of your funding from a different source.
Yeah, different source.
Because a lot of times the serial entrepreneurs, they just, they made money for the VCs once, they just go back to the same ones, and they're entrepreneur in residence there for a little time, and then finally they spin out on a good idea like the one that you had with NextCure. But it sounds like it was a little different in that case.
Yeah, well, relationships are key, to everything, whether you're doing scientific research or building a business. We actually knew David Kabikoff, our chairman at Amplimmune. He was part of Sofinova. He's now our chairman at NextCure. So there was that relationship. We knew some of the other investors that had not invested in some of our past companies, but were well aware of what we were doing. So they kind of came in and were very supportive. And then over time, we went from that Series A to additional investments over time to advance the company and to kind of accelerate what we were trying to achieve.
So you've got some assets that are in clinical trials at this point. How's it spread across the different phases right now?
Yeah, we're really proud of that. So in 6 years, we went from pretty much nothing to having 3 candidates in clinical development.
Yeah.
So we've got 2 phase 2s going on with our lead program, NC318. This is a novel antibody that focuses on targeting Siglec-15. This is a target expressed both on the tumor and on the infiltrating macrophages. And what we're doing with this particular candidate is to alleviate this immunosuppressive environment and to restore immune function. So that's currently in phase 2 in monotherapy. We'll have a readout Q4 of this year. We also are doing a combination study with Roy Herbst and Scott Gettinger at Yale. combining NC318 with Keytruda, where Merck is kindly providing the drug to support that study. So that combination study is ongoing in lung cancer, and we'll be providing an update on that trial second half. So a lot of news flow going on second half of the year. We also have 2 phase 1 studies currently ongoing. Our NC410 program is a layer 2 fusion that actually binds collagen in the tumor itself, helps to remodel collagen. In other words, it's changing the architecture of the tumor itself, which allows the T cells to infiltrate, attack the tumor, and to restore immune function. And we're pretty close to finishing that phase 1, and we'll be providing an update on that trial second half of this year. And then thirdly, our third program, lucky we only have 3, but our third program is in working its way through the phase 1 dose escalation. This is NC762. It's a humanized antibody binding B7H4 that's overexpressed on many tumors, in particular a lot of the gynecological cancers, ovarian cancer, breast cancer, fallopian tube. So that will also read out second half of this year. So we'll have 4 clinical readouts this year, plus we'll file our 4th IND for our 4th program, NC525, which is an antibody against layer 1, and we'll be taking that into the clinic for AML.
Wow. It was lucky I got you on the program right now, because by fourth quarter you're going to be way too busy to be sitting down for chats like this. But that just sounds fantastic. And I got to say that you epitomize what I think of as being a technological entrepreneur. Not just in biological sciences like what you're doing, but that's the whole idea, is that technologies open up opportunities and entrepreneurs figure out how to leverage those opportunities and create value and to make a sustainable business model out of it. And, what an amazing career through a series of startups, and nobody would believe that you didn't have a PhD, right? Because you talk like a PhD that, migrated into management. But I think that coming up the way that you did, you really got a chance to do every single thing in the company that you're running right now, and that really does put you in a great position to, prioritize and to explain and to attract all the resources that you need for another great success. Is this the first time that you've served as a CEO president?
It's my second.
And was Amplimmune the first one?
Was the first,
Yeah.
and I was a chief operating officer at Macrogenics before then.
Yeah.
But I think this is why startup companies are such a valuable environment for not only developing novel products and building organizations, but it's a great training ground for the next generation of professionals.
Yeah.
I mean, in a startup, as you're growing, as you're kind of building, there's a lot of talent development that goes on, where you give people exposure to so many facets of not only doing great science, but the product development process itself. And we take a lot of pride at that at NextCure, independent of being at the cutting edge of innovation in developing drugs that impact the immune system, and fulfilling our responsibilities to shareholders. But first and foremost, our focus is on patients, shareholders, but employee development. And this is something that actually the Maryland area does really well. And with having so many startup companies, you can hire people from the universities, give them the opportunity to do great research, but also train them in the various facets that go into product development.
I mean, what you're really doing is you're creating a lot of mini-me's or mini-yous, right?
Hopefully better.
Yeah, well, that's nice of you to say, but I think you're right that there's a huge amount of value to getting into an environment like what you've created at NextCure. And especially if the CEO has an eye towards developing folks that can move up and can take on more responsibility and go across functions and things like that, because we're going to need a lot of top-notch, scientifically comfortable and aware and, maybe even expert that become CEOs, that become businessmen, that become entrepreneurs. And there's so much to it. It's very easy to get, you back me up on this if you feel that it's true, but I think that it's very easy to get really caught up just in the domain of science and sometimes forget that a successful company or even getting a product out to market requires so many other pieces around it, right? And so, there's really good elements to being creative and knowledgeable in the science area, but you've got to be creative and knowledgeable in many different areas to create an overall company success. I mean, this is something that you've done many times. I mean, when you're the COO of a company like Macrogenics, okay, that is, huge amount of responsibility and a real diverse portfolio in terms of what you need to be able to manage within that company. And then you go to the CEO slot. That's another one more step up that combines a few more things in there, but it's not an insurmountable hop. And now you move over to your second try at that. Are you finding it that much easier?
No, it doesn't get any easier, in all honesty. And I mean, the purpose that really kind of drives our work is still there. But the environment changes. For instance, in today's world, there's no school, at least I'm aware of, that trains you to build a company during a pandemic.
Right.
And with an impact on manufacturing capacity, supply chains, human capital, and trying to bring people in. Inflation, that course in geopolitics that no one ever pays attention to has now really come to life, right? So there's a lot of facets that you really have to deal with. And at this period of time in our industry, with so many companies, you have to uplift the talent pool very, very quickly.
Yeah.
So not all of them will be CEOs, but I look at it, everyone as an entrepreneur in their own right. Whatever facet of work they're doing, our goal is to bring out the best in those people, whether they're doing quality assurance, whether they're doing discovery, whether they're working on manufacturing. And we're fortunate to have some of the best people in NextCure based on their own experiences. Many of them have done pioneering work and have equally, if not better, resumes with respect to the companies they've worked with and the companies they've built. So, but yeah, people always ask, oh, you've done this before, it must be easy. It's always a challenge. It's a high risk environment. We're trying to converge different technologies to really transform, modern day medicine. And we're doing a lot of things that have never been done before. So as you know, Jeff, the risks are really high.
Yeah.
It's very costly. It's a lot of human capital goes into this. So what we need to do is really, it's like the Rubik's Cube. We got to keep changing and dialing in, different effects based on what we need. The types of people we need. How do we cross-train them? How do we optimize efficiencies? How do we make sure that we're being compliant from a quality perspective, now being a public company, a legal perspective. So there's a lot of things changing in front of us, which is fascinating, if you're an entrepreneur, because you kind of thrive on that change.
Yeah.
But there's also a lot of competition out there. There's a lot of companies, and everyone's trying to recruit the best talent, raise the most capital, advance their programs into, clinical trials in the United States and abroad. So there's a lot of moving pieces that we have to deal with. With that said, it's a very supportive industry. Unlike other industries, you're friends with your competitors. You're collaborating with them. You're sharing data. You're sharing information. Sometimes you're sometimes you're co-authoring abstracts and papers, or even co-inventorship on patent applications. So I think what built the industry was these types of relationships, and you still see them today.
Yeah, that's absolutely classic. I don't know if you were in Silicon Valley at the time when we used to, say this all the time, but we called the other companies around Silicon Valley cooperation.
Yeah.
Right? We're all competitors, but the tide is rising so quickly that there's enough opportunity for everybody, and as a result, we don't have to have that strict, win-lose attitude about things, and we can collaborate together to create a better overall industry. That was just absolutely classic in Silicon Valley throughout the computer, software, internet, apps, IT, everything, right? And I'm really glad to hear you saying that has been characteristic of your journey through DNA Valley as well. because I think that's going to be another fundamental driver is that there is a lot of cross-pollination, right? There aren't absolutely strict boundaries between different places, and there is some movement around where your challenges may actually be solved by, somebody down the street. We used to call that next bench syndrome. When I was at Hewlett Packard, they used to say, whatever you're working on and then you encounter a problem, there's probably somebody that's making an instrument that will solve that problem like a couple of benches down. Well, that's the critical mass of a new industry. That was electronics. Same thing happened in computers and software. And now I think it's happening in biotech right here. That, there's so much stuff going on in this area that when you need something, you find it's not that far away. You don't have to go all the way to Boston or San Francisco or San Diego or overseas for it. Somebody here locally is working on that angle.
So true. I mean, a recent example during COVID, supply chains were constrained and people were looking for certain reagents or chemicals or resins and, people were reaching out to each other, and you just don't see that in many other industries. And, it gets back to that kind of cooperation. But that's how most of us are trained. We come out of the university, we're used to working on teams. No one person can solve the problem, by themselves.
Right.
So, and product development in our industry is so complicated. You have to kind of bring, all of those teams together and all of those, resources.
Yeah, and problems abound, problems are endless, but those problems and challenges are actually opportunities, right?
Exactly.
To go ahead and apply ourselves, and every time you come up with a clever solution, it's going to be used somewhere. That's the other nice thing is that, maybe it's not the end product by itself, but that discovery or that idea or that solution that you came up with might be part of some other product, or there's a bunch of people around you that are doing that, and you can pull some of those things in order to accelerate the development that you're doing, which, by the way, has been remarkable to have that many, clinical assets in that short a period of time. I mean, that's, good, not just good timing, being right place, right time. That's really efficient work to progress them that way. And so, it's good to hear. I think a lot of people listening to this who are entrepreneurs, maybe just starting companies of their own right now, are really going to enjoy what you've been saying, that even with your background, you're facing things that are new every day, new challenges. You even brought up the idea of, how do you deal with a pandemic in the middle of growing a company? Well, you just deal with it, right? And that's what entrepreneurship is all about. And people that have a background of problem solving, I think of that as engineering in one way or another. It could be, organization engineering. It could be engineering of science. It could be engineering of anything, right? But engineering is all about problem solving. And, this is just fundamental to not just creating value in times of adversity like, the pandemic, but creating value at any time. It's spotting opportunities where a solution is imminent and you could go ahead and create that solution. And, so we probably got a lot of people listening to this program right now that are at different stages of their startups. And, it's exciting to hear you, even with the level of experience that you have, saying, yeah, this is still hard. It's still challenging, right? But that you thrive on it, right? If you love a challenge, go into entrepreneurship.
Well, we're trained to solve problems, and when, you're working with purpose in solving a problem that's going to help others, that's a real driver. That's a real motivator. And, you mentioned about, engineering solutions. One of the things I've learned in building these companies is, we have a lot of PhD scientists, but we also have a lot of chemical engineers that work on the manufacturing side. And that cross-fertilization of scientific thinking and coming up with a hypothesis and doing experimental work to come up with a solution and aligning that with how an engineer thinks in trying to come up with various solutions, that's where the magic happens.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people think of just our companies as scientists. Yeah. But, we're fortunate at the University of Maryland, they're churning out chemical engineers all the time. Yeah. And the STEM programs, as you mentioned earlier, play into being able to hire, so much talent. And then it's our job to help professionally develop them. But yeah, the problem solving never goes away. And I think that's what drives most of the people in our industry. Whether everyone has that little entrepreneurial gene in them, they kind of implement it or play it out in different ways, but they love problem solving.
And I love the fact that you as a CEO are avoiding siloing people, right? Because I agree, like a good idea can come from anywhere, and that sort of collaborative, almost improvisational, yes, and we could do this, right, is what brings different disciplines together and comes up with creative solutions that you wouldn't see any other way.
Yes.
So, get everybody listening and not, just getting blinders on and sticking to just their area and their traditional tool set. Get them talking to other people that are part of the mission. And that's also another thing that you just brought up, is what ties everybody together is passion for the mission.
Exactly.
Right? That's one of the things that we talk about all the time around here, is that, one, creativity cures. What does that mean? Thinking outside of the box, listening to a lot of crazy ideas. You're going to have to come up with 90 ideas, to come up with one good one that is going to solve your problem. And, the more people you have at the brainstorming session, that are problem solvers and creative people, okay, you're going to hit that faster.
That's so true.
Yeah, and then, focus on the patient. You said that before in our discussion here today, is that you said, you're focused on the patient. Well, that's a very gratifying, exciting, emotional, place to put your passion, right? Because there's a lot of people, there's nothing more fulfilling than helping others. And in biotech, we can help huge numbers of people at a time.
Exactly.
How many people have the cancers that you now are on the eve of phase 2 results that may bring better outcomes within those various particular forms of cancer? I mean, that's got to be a great feeling.
It is a great feeling. I mean, there's probably no one on the planet that hasn't been impacted by losing a loved one or a friend that's succumbed to some sort of illness, including cancer.
Yep.
It's one of those words that when you hear it, it just puts a chill up your spine.
Yeah.
And which is kind of great, because when you're recruiting talent, from the beginning that they've already made that decision, that they want to do something special with their lives and helping others, and whether it's scientific or engineering or technology. So, our focus here is really to, bring out the best of people's passion, and apply their creativity, their imagination, and their dreams, and give them a real healthy environment and a passionate culture to just really do great science and, to your point, solve big problems. And we're not afraid to address big problems. There's a lot of companies out there doing some very interesting work and maybe looking at, incremental improvements of certain products, which is okay. But, to be at that forefront of science and making a difference and really aligning, interests from all different facets of education and the workplace just is pretty magical.
Yeah, I mean, NextCure sounds like a tremendous place to be, doing really important work with attitudes in the C-suite that I think will lead to tremendous success. I mean, that will really maximize your ability to fulfill this mission that you've started out on. It's just great to hear you talk about your ideas for entrepreneurship and for growing these companies and your reason for making these companies. And I'm feeling it, and I hope a lot of people that are listening to this are feeling it too, because I think this is going to be the key ingredients to really making DNA Valley take off. And, I want to cover one last thing before I let you go, because I tell you that would be a great end to this interview. But I'm wondering about one more thing that I saw in Silicon Valley that maybe you're seeing here already, but I think that I'd love to see more of this in the future. And that is that companies like the ones that you've been at already, like MedImmune and Macrogenics, and I think you're clearly on your way to a giant success here at NextCure. Well, they make a lot of wealthy people. And will those wealthy people stay here and invest in their backyard or create new companies, or will they, retire and, move away? What do you think the trend will be there?
Well, I kind of look at wealth in a different context. I mean, there's the financial wealth that a lot of people think about. I think there's knowledge wealth, where you've learned a lot through your developing an expertise and your experience. And, through that different kind of combination of experiences and that wealth, lots of times people want to figure out, well, how do they give back? So financial wealth, they could do investments on their own. Obviously, they can make, donations to various different causes. But I think a lot of people you see in this industry, they want to give back from the standpoint of developing the next generation of professionals. They want to continue to take all that knowledge and experience and kind of apply it in building the next company. And they may take on a different role. Maybe they want to run a company, or maybe they want to just sit on a board, or maybe they want to be a passive investor or an active investor, or maybe they just want to consult. But they want to be part of the ecosystem, and that never goes away. Even people that retire, we've talked about this, that bugs in you. You want to make a difference, you want to contribute, and you want to drive value or improvements. So I think a lot of people here that have done really well, at least the ones that are fairly young, they're going to, move on and hopefully maybe start their own company, because their risk tolerance has changed. It's a little bit different when, you're working in a situation and you're paying a mortgage and you're saving up for college and retirement. So, how you think about building one's career and taking on risk is different than if you help build a successful company and there's a nest egg there, and then people could take on a different level of risk. And you see that a lot. And I think what we've seen in, DNA Valley is, many entrepreneurs that have done a great job in building their organizations, have probably achieved a certain stature in knowledge and experience and in financial gain. And then they're able to continue building or start another company. And this is how you kind of satellite, an ecosystem.
Right.
And then you couple that with, all the government institutions and agencies, all the universities. You have all the ingredients and that secret sauce you're talking about to really make things happen. And I think also the mindset of people are changing. It's partially due to the educational system. People are seeing opportunities. When we grew up, the glass was either half full, empty or half full. Now I think it's totally full. It just gets a little sour at times. So I think we're starting to see a whole new generation of people that are willing to take risk and really try to kind of push the envelope of moving technology and science forward. And it's accelerating. It's getting faster. The challenges for, I think, all of us is how do we continue to adapt in this technology changing world, where whether it's IT, cybersecurity, big data, artificial intelligence, machine language, and then everything going on in the life sciences that impact us. Not only in immunology, but as scientists and entrepreneurs, we need to understand other fields, because it's that convergence that's going to make a difference. And this is what we saw with just even the COVID vaccines. Different technologies coming together, developing vaccines in a different way that would ultimately play into solving a very big problem.
So you sound very optimistic about it. I mean, the basic premise of my question is the stickiness of this area. Because I would love to get to a point where, just like in Silicon Valley, you can't throw a rock without hitting somebody that made money off of stock.
Right.
Okay. Well, that's a whole different risk, tolerance, sort of risk profile than what existed here in 1996. I think it's amazing that you saw that this was going to, sort of go that direction in 1996. I came here in 2007 and I just realized there's too much good stuff here for it not to happen. And there's a revolution about to happen in gene and cell therapy, and what better place for it to take off. My next question, became, I kind of feel a loyalty to this area and I kind of love it here. You know, I like the people here. I like the community. I like the vibe. I like the nature. You know, I grew. You know, I had spent 30 years in Silicon Valley, and I would say, yeah, I miss the weather there a little bit, but that's it. Everything else, you know, is better here for me, and there is room to really grow things in a way that you can't get in Cambridge anymore or in San Francisco. You know, so then the question becomes is, okay, you know, what happens to guys like you? You know, you've been here long enough that I kind of trust you're going to stick around. You may decide like, oh, I'm too tired to do my next venture, but you might go, but I might be an angel investor and sit on a board of the next one. Okay, that's the kind of stickiness that I'm looking for in this area to make this, you know, really DNA Valley. When we get to the point where we hit critical mass in that risk tolerance area and in that financial wherewithal area, and you know, and we're not always looking around at developers and consultants who built these big cost plus, you know, projects where really the risk is quite moderate compared to biotech or even computers or even software or apps or any of those things or internet, right? That's why Silicon Valley really took off, or one of the big parts. You know, look at, you probably, you know, even if you're not from Silicon Valley, you've heard of Sand Hill Road.
Yeah.
Right? There's just this collection of successful entrepreneurs and investors, and you know, they're so big right now. They're more like investment banks than they are like the traditional VCs. Sure. But I see, you know, there's an opportunity for a lot of people like you to become the traditional VCs of this next generation of startup people in this area that is going to have all this momentum in gene and cell therapy and biopharmaceuticals and, you know, all these technologies. What do you think? Will it hold you here a little bit? Will we get that kind of stickiness from other entrepreneurs around here?
I think so. I mean, the momentum is already there. The question is, what is the rate of growth? You know, in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, it went really quick. That was, you know, the birth ground of biotech. That was the birth ground of computers. You know, so it takes time for some of this technology to kind of move into other settings from both a university perspective and training people that are willing to start new companies, as well as the ecosystem of investors and lawyers and accountants and everything that goes into supporting that. So the stickiness is there. I think you have a very strong layer of Velcro across the mid-Atlantic region. We're already seeing lots of companies. You know, you're seeing research companies, and they cover everything from infectious diseases to cancer to orphan drugs. You see the GMP manufacturing ecosystem just blossom with respect to people building infrastructure and providing jobs for, you know, a lot of these engineers. So I think it's happening. I think over time you will see, you know, a stronger investment base. I mean, you do have some small venture capital groups. You have NEA here, but you'll start seeing more and more of that. And I do think people that have, you know, kind of been grounded here and have helped build a community, this is where their network is. This is where their relationships are. This is where their kids went to school. So yeah, I think people are going to stay here. And you know, the Mid-Atlantic in particular has a lot to offer. When I came out here, I said, oh, I'm going to miss the Bay Bridge. I got to Maryland and said, oh, they have a Bay Bridge. And then they said, well, I'm going to miss the crabs in San Francisco. Well, Maryland has better crabs.
Right.
So, and you know, it's the environment and the geography between, you know, the Atlantic Ocean and the mountains, you know, is pretty impressive. You know, a lot of people come here and stay. The reason I think it's going to get stronger is you're building up a knowledge base, you're building up an experience base. And those entrepreneurs, depending on where they are in that curve, in their risk profile, they will blossom. And this is a great environment because there's so much going on in the government. And the government's purpose is not to develop products. And we see technology coming out. I'm amazed. You know, I was just looking at some work that NASA was doing and all the people going to space and the impact that medicine is going to have in trying to sustain people in a zero gravity environment. It's going to impact their bone mass. And so I think there's a lot of interesting things going on here. And unlike other, like you mentioned Silicon Valley, where you're constantly bumping into people that kind of share your views or are approaching a problem maybe with a different angle. You see this, you go into any coffee shop or any sandwich shops, people on their computer building, thinking about how they're developing their companies, sharing ideas. So this will continue to build on itself. Sometimes it takes time, but when I think about having been here 25 years and kind of a handful of companies, and now looking at the number of companies, the stage of development, the versatility, the focus, it's impressive. So, and once this thing gets going, you can't slow it down.
Yeah.
Because people, like you said, will find opportunities. The opportunities are there. And people will look at these opportunities, with a different lens with respect to their own vision. And the beauty is most inventions come through convergence of two ideas. Where do you have so many ideas where you've got NIH and NCI, not to mention, NIST or the Department of Energy or USDA, all of this stuff comes into ultimate healthcare. And while we focus on, developing therapeutics and drugs, it's not a far reach to start thinking about, we talked about agriculture and the impact on you are what you eat and how that's going to impact health, and the microbiome and how that comes into play, and how that impacts your gut-brain axis with respect to your own health, whether it's your mind or your physical health. So there's a lot of things going on, and
and there's no shortage of problems to solve, no shortage of opportunities, and it sounds like you think there'll be no shortage of money in the future too. You think that these entrepreneurs will stick around after having created a success at one company or done well at one company. They're going to have the interest in staying within the community and playing a role in the next companies that come out, or maybe even forming their own companies and going another round. I think that's fantastic. This has been a great interview. Not only are you the quintessential entrepreneur, I just think that if people are listening to your arc and they feel like they're somewhere on that arc, they're gonna they have huge potential to build DNA Valley with folks like you. And you just remind me so much of all of the computer and software people that I met out in Silicon Valley while that was getting tremendous momentum. And it when I went there in 1980, it wasn't really as, just overwhelmingly successful in anything that it did, right? There were still questions, right? But it did get to the point now where, it's just, there's not room to build out, more industries. But every industry that they start up, they have money for it and they have talent for it, they have brains for it, they have universities that are feeding it. I mean, they have all the elements out there. But what do you know? We have all those elements too. So folks like you can do great things in this area. And then, you're really optimistic about the future of this and our ability to make this a virtuous cycle of entrepreneurship and to continue to build this, further and further. And so here you are. You heard it here. And by the way, we're going to keep this whole interview on file. And if Michael makes so much money off of NextCure and then we find out he's planning to move out of the area, we're going to shame him right back here, at least on weekends, to sit on boards, invest in local companies, and to mentor folks like himself. And with some of you even mentioned that you had some really great mentors in this area as well.
Definitely. And
keep this thing going. So thank you for everything that you're doing here in DNA Valley, and thank you for stopping by for this interview.
Thanks, Jeff. It was a pleasure. Really nice to speak with you, and appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks.
Thanks.